Hi everyone, thank you for joining us. I'm Laura Jones, and in this session we're speaking with Andy DuBois. Andy is a leading ultra coach in Australia, Hong Kong and Singapore with a number of elite athletes on his books. He's also a leading expert in using power meters in ultras and trail running. Andy lives in Australia where he runs his coaching business, Mile 27 Endurance Training. Andy, thanks ever so much for joining us.
It's an absolute pleasure.
Okay, so perhaps you could start by telling us a little bit about your background in ultra running and how you became a coach.
Yeah, so I did Ironman for about 9 or 10 years in Australia, and then my wife and I moved to London, and then the thought of doing Ironman in London just really didn't appeal. Riding a bike for that long and swimming in those small dark pools just didn't kind of get me at all. So a friend of mine suggested, there's this race in Scotland called the West Highland Way. I said, that sounds good. How long is it? So 95 miles. All right, I'll do that. So that was my first ultra. I was a pretty good runner in terms of Ironman. Like I was just over a 3-hour marathon runner in an Ironman. So come the start of the West Highland Way, I kind of thought, I've got this. So I took off with a guy that most of the UK listeners might know, Jez Bragg. So I took off the Jez and ran with Jez for about 20 miles. That year, Jez broke the course record, and I finished about 9 or 10 hours behind him. I finished though. I made every mistake in the book. Everything you can possibly do wrong in an ultra, I did. But I finished, and then my wife said to me afterwards, "Is this really what you want to do?" I said, "Yeah, look, I think I've got what it takes to do a ride of this, so I'm going to give it one more go." So I signed up to the next race that took my fancy, which was Ultra Trail Mont Blanc. Back then, this was back in 2007, you didn't need to qualify, you didn't need points, which is first in, best dressed. So I signed up. That was my second race, and just completely rethought how I trained for it. I've been a personal trainer for ages, had coached triathletes, coached marathon runners, the whole time doing Ironman. So I could apply all that knowledge to ultra, kind of completely rethought how I trained for it and raced it. And ended up running under 29 hours, coming on a 74th or something, having an absolute blinder of a race and loving it. And been hooked ever since. So once I did that race, I kind of started to, in my personal training business, started to attract more marathon and ultra marathon runners. So I started coaching more and more and more. And then when I got back to Australia, somebody emailed me and said, "Andy, do you do online coaching?" At the time I didn't, but I said, yes, I do online coaching. So I madly scrambled to get something on a website and make that happen. And that side of business, this is back in 2011, and that side of the business kind of started to grow pretty quickly. Like, online coaching and ultras was growing quite a lot. So I gradually ditched the personal training and became a full-time online running coach for ultras. Yeah.
Wow. So that was a real baptism of fire then, to go from the marathon distance in an Ironman, it's a marathon distance, to jump into nearly 100 miler.
But I kind of thought, look, I've done 9 hours racing in an Ironman, like 14, 15 hours isn't that big a jump, but it's a big jump. I don't recommend it.
Yeah.
It's not the ideal way to get into ultras, and I certainly don't recommend it to anybody who asks me, but I survived.
Yeah. One of the questions I normally ask, the elites, is what's the biggest mistake you've made? So you've kind of just answered that one. There was yours.
Yeah, going out way too fast. Way too fast.
Yeah,
definitely the biggest mistake.
Okay, can you tell us a little bit about your coaching philosophy and broadly, what that encompasses?
Yep. So I think first of all, it's got to be fun. Like, you've got to enjoy your training. Ultras, you spend a lot of time on your feet. You're potentially spending a lot of time on your own, in races, if not in training. So it's got to be enjoyable. So for me, it's all about talking with the client and working out what kind of sessions they like. Now, of course, you have to do some sessions if you want to finish ultras. So they say, look, I don't like running more than 10Ks. Look, I'm sorry, you've chosen the wrong sport. But within the framework of their training, we can find sessions they like. Then that's one thing. I think consistency is something I'm really big on. I think above all else, if you can keep consistency in your training, even if you do no speed work, no hill work, just stay consistently running as often as possible, you're 3/4 of the way there. So I'm a big believer in consistency. I think speed work and hill work is really important for ultra runners. I think too many of us neglect kind of going to the track and doing fast hill reps. I'm not talking about 100-meter sprints or anything like that, but I think 1K reps, 1 mile reps, even if you're doing Ultra Mont Blanc or races like that, I think they play a big part. So I think if you get the right balance of speed work, enjoying your training, consistency, and the last thing was trying to be as specific as you can with your long runners. Like, if your race has 400 meters of vert per 10K, then trying to get your long runners to simulate that as much as you can. I know when I was in London, I lived in London training for UTMB. So as any of the UK listeners will know, London's not exactly a trail running mecca. So I live near Hampstead Heath, which fortunately is not a bad place to run around. But the biggest trail hill I had was 90 seconds long. So my 4-hour training runs consisted of over 100 reps up and down that trail hill, because that's what the race needed. So consistency is key. Whereas before, when I trained for West Highland Way, I just kind of ran around the heath a bit. And I thought, I'm getting some hills in. It's all good. But then I realised it has to be a lot more specific if you want to enjoy the race. And I think enjoying racing for people is, most of us have done those races where the last 30, 40 miles just suck. Yeah. Just going, right, I've done 60 miles, I've done 70 miles, I've ticked the box, I just want it to be over now. And I think if you can not have that experience and be feeling good towards the end, A, you do better, but B, you enjoy racing so much more. So that's a real focus of mine.
Yeah. And do you recommend that your clients incorporate any sort of cross-training or strength?
I think strength is underrated by a lot of people. I think people are put off strength because a lot of strength coaches kind of are big on the kind of heavy weights, light reps, low reps, getting into a gym, deadlifting, squats. And look, there's certainly a strong argument for doing that kind of training, but I think it alienates a massive percentage of ultra runners. We don't like going to a gym. We don't like lifting heavy weights. It makes us sore. We can't run, then we don't like it even more. So I'm a big believer in that for ultra running. There's a strong argument for a more dynamic body weight type strength training. So, lunges, jump lunges, walking lunges, jumps, hops, skips, that kind of training can be done at home, can be done in 30, 40 minutes. Don't need any equipment, won't make you too sore, but also gives you a lot of benefits to your running. I still an online strength training program, 10 sessions consisting of just bodyweight exercises. So I think that kind of bridges the gap between runners who think they should do some strength training and they're right, but they don't want to go to a gym.
Yeah.
So I think it's really important.
Yeah, and like you say, there is that element of it being a bit daunting. I think particularly for women as well, if they're thinking of, going into a gym. Okay, you've answered this a little bit, but whilst every client is unique, are there any kind of key things that you would say apply to pretty much everyone, regardless of their kind of experience and their level?
Yeah, consistency is number one. So consistency might mean for an elite, 120, 130, 160K a week. Or it might mean for a working professional with kids, it might mean 60K a week. But if you're doing 30K one week, 70K the next week, 40K the next week, A, you're not going to get the training benefits, and 2, you're much more likely to injure. So for me, it's about trying to find that level of training that the client can consistently do, rather than thinking, okay, I could do this. I mean, when I take on a new client, I ask them what the typical training week is. Then when I look at their Strava or Garmin or whatever and see what they've actually done, 9 times out of 10, what they've actually done is far less than what their typical training week is. Because their typical week is what they ideally think they're doing, but in reality, they're not doing that because work, they've got to work late one night, the kid gets sick one day, kids' sports get in the way, etc. So it's about finding that level of training that they can consistently manage week in, week out, because that's going to bring results. Speed work, whether you're back of the pack, front of the pack, in the middle of the pack, big believer in speed work. And likewise for hill training. I think almost all the ultras, 99% of the clients I coach are doing hills. So unless you're doing some kind of hill training, I think you're missing a bit of training that could be really helpful to you. And as I said before, specificity, getting those long runs in with roughly the same amount of vert. I think if you tick all those boxes, you've got a long way to having an effective training program.
Yeah. And what about the mental side of ultra running? How do you try and help your clients prepare for what it takes when it gets, when you get into those really dark patches?
That's a really good question. I think it's underrated to a degree. I think the common philosophy is like, you've just got to learn to harden up, which is kind of works for some people, like the David Goggins approach. You know, swear at yourself, just harden up as much as you can. I don't think that works for a lot of people. I think you've got to be a bit more specific about your mental training and think about what works for you. So in terms of training, what I'm big on is trying to get people to think about what's the best thing my mind can be doing at the moment. So, for example, in a long run when things are going well, the best thing you can do is switch off, conserve your mental energy, take in the surroundings, let your thoughts tick along to solving problems at work or home, and just detach yourself. So your brain's not really doing much at all. Once things get harder, though, then you've got to switch back on to what's going on. So then it's a case of giving yourself some tools that can help you stay present in the present moment. Because I think too often we start thinking about, okay, this is how I'm feeling, this is how long I've got to go. And when you match how you're feeling with how long you've got to go, the brain often goes, actually, that doesn't compute. Like, I can't keep this up, that's too long. And let's face it, ultras for a lot of people is a jump into the unknown. So the brain's got nothing it can really objectively say, look, you've done this before, so you can do it again. When you're stepping up a distance or you're trying to go a bit faster, the brain goes, look, you've never run 100 Ks, 100 miles this fast before, so we've got nothing to base any conviction on, and it's hurting now, and we've got 30K to go. Slow down. So I think you've got to try and short circuit that thought process, and the best way to do that is to stay present. Now, how you stay present is kind of individual approaches work. You know, for me, I might count to 10 and repeat that over and over again. I might just focus on my breathing. I might recite a mantra in my head. I might just fiddle my fingers just to take my attention away from pain and focus on that. Or I might focus internally and remind myself that the reason my legs are hurting is because it's working hard, and therefore I'm doing well, and therefore that's a good thing. So I might go into the suffering is good kind of mindset. So I think any of those mindsets can help, but I think the mistake people make is they don't try them until they get into that dark patch in their race. And mental stuff's like anything. Unless you practice it, you're not very good at it. So you need to practice that in training. I mean, other tips I do is, you know, when you run through a checkpoint and you get to the checkpoint and you're feeling crap, you go into the checkpoint, you've got friends, loved ones cheering you, and all of a sudden, I feel great again. You run out of the checkpoint and 2 miles down the track, you're going, I don't feel so good anymore. So I think visualizing people around you, you know, visualizing that your best mates on the side of the trail just up ahead cheering you, you know, that kind of visualization with practice can become very strong, and you can take inspiration from that. But I think that doesn't happen easily unless you practice it consistently in training. So, you know, in speed training or hill sessions where things get hard, that's a time to practice those mental strategies so you can put them in a place in training. I think too many of us just kind of grunt our way through the hard sessions, and then when it gets to ultras, just kind of like try and harden up and toughen our way through and suffer through the low points. But if you've developed good, strong mental strategies in training, you can apply them much easier in races.
Yeah, really good tips there. Thank you. Okay, and what about you know, nutrition and hydration? I mean, obviously this is, you know, really personal, but what advice do you give to your clients?
Yeah, I think the first thing is to really start simple. I mean, we can talk scientific studies and nutrition and the stomach and absorption rates and osmolality and all kinds of things till the cows come home. But when it comes to ultras, what it comes down to is what can your stomach handle hour after hour after hour. So, I mean, my kind of world into this was at UTMB, because coming from an Ironman background, it's all about gels and sports drinks. You know, that's all we all have. So when I kind of started doing ultras, I mean, I remember my wife telling me at UTMB, she saw one of the guys in the top 10 running out of a checkpoint at 120K with a full-size baguette in his hand, chowing down on salami and cheese baguettes. Like, really? Like, this is top 10 guy? Like, how does this work? So that kind of made me think a little bit that maybe I should start being a little bit less kind of like, has to be, you know, sports drinks and gels into like, let's see what works. So not that we throw the science away. The science tells us we can absorb 160 to 240 calories an hour. With training, we can push that up to 300 calories, maybe for some people. So my advice is to always start on the lower end, start at about 160, 200 calories per hour, and practice in training. Get yourself used to whatever food, drinks, sports drinks, gels, whatever. Try it out in training, try it out in long runs, and get your stomach conditioned to that. Having said that, even if you've done a 4 or 5 hour long run, it's all felt fine, it doesn't mean it's going to be fine for 10 or 15 hours. So once you've found something that works for 4 or 5 hours, the next trick is to go, right, let's toss that out and let's come up with plan B and plan C. let's find something that's a bit kind of more savoury, for example, or a bit more natural foods, a bit more texture to it rather than a gel. So it might be, trail mix, chocolate and nuts or something. And just play around with some ideas to try and get some backup alternatives. Yeah. If the race you're doing has an extensive list of food like UTMB does, practice with what they offer. Find out what they offer at the checkpoints. Practice with that in training. So if your gels or sports drink is not going down well, you've tried dried fruit or cheese or sandwiches or noodles or whatever it is. You've tried it in training. So you think, well, plan A is not working, but I've got a plan B and plan C, so let's try that out as well. So I think, once again, it's a case of practice in training, come up with plan B and plan C, and then hopefully come race time, you've got enough options to get you through.
Yeah, that's good advice. I always love asking that question and hearing the different answers, because it's such a personal thing, isn't it? And I've had everything from pizza, salty potatoes to be really popular.
Yeah, it's whatever works. And I think if you look around running forums, you'll get a stack of ideas, which is great, because then you can try something. Anybody that tells you that tailwind is the magic cure to all your stomach problems is lying, because it's not. It might be the magic cure for some people, but rice balls might be the magic cure for someone else, and pizza might be the magic cure for someone else. Yeah. So don't get hung up on it. Try different things, find out what works, and then you've got a plan for your race.
Yeah. Okay. You're a known expert on the use of power meters in ultras and trail running. So for anyone who doesn't know what they are, can you give us a little explanation?
Yeah. So it's just a little kind of foot pod that attaches to your shoe that gives you a reading of how much work you're doing when you're running. So the easiest way to think about it for those who've never heard or used one is, instead of using heart rate or pace to tell you how fast you're going or how hard you're working, you use power. The advantages are, like with pace in trails, like if you're running on the flat, you might be doing, 8-minute miles. You start running uphill, so then you're doing 12-minute miles. You're going downhill, you're doing 6-minute miles. So you can't really use pace as any kind of measure of effort to judge how fast you should be going. Heart rate, you can to a degree, but then, a lot of people don't like wearing heart rate monitors for ultras, because it just chafes. It sits under your rib cage for like 10, 15 hours or more. Rubs, it chafes, it's uncomfortable. Even if it doesn't, then the problem with heart rate is stress affects it, time of day affects it, hydration level affects it, heat, cool affects it. So it's also slow to respond. So you start running up a hill and it takes a couple of minutes before it responds to you running up the hill. So it's got quite a few limitations, which expert users might be able to negotiate around, but for a beginner, it's a bit harder. So what most people use in ultras is a combination of pace on the flats, heart rate some of the time, or your perceived exertion. Now, what most listeners will know is that at the start of a race, what feels pretty comfortable at the start of the race, 3/4 of the race through the race, they go, actually, it's not so comfortable after all. I'm starting to cramp. I'm starting to walk more. And that's 9 times out of 10 due to the fact they went out too fast. So things like cramping and dodgy stomachs, sore quads, all that kind of stuff, 9 times out of 10 is because you went out too hard, either for your fitness or for the conditions on the day. So any tool we can use that can accurately give us an indication of how hard we should go out running, especially in the first 20, 30 miles of a race, is going to be beneficial. And the advantage of power meters is that whether you're running flat, uphill or downhill, we can work on basically almost one number that's not affected by the time of day. It's not affected by the heat. It's not affected by fresh legs, because you know what it's like, 8-minute miles might be your normal, comfortable, easy run pace in training. But geez, it feels so easy when you're on fresh, tapered legs in a race, and you find yourself running 7-minute 30 miles. And then 20 miles in the race, you go, oh, that's probably a bit too quick. So power meters aren't affected by that. If it's 200 watts, it's 200 watts. Doesn't matter how tired you are, it's 200 watts. So it's so much usable in terms of pacing for ultras that I'm really big on that, because it just gives you a lot more feedback and useful information compared to heart rates and pace and perceived exertion.
Yeah, it's really interesting to hear, the different way of measuring it. So obviously it measures power. So what does that actually mean? How does that actually translate to running?
So without getting too technical, there's accelerometers in the foot pod that measure a whole lot of variables that gets converted into a power number by an algorithm. So what the guys, when I use Stride, they're kind of the industry leaders on running power meters. So what they've done is measured a whole stack of people on treadmills, connected them up to every gizmo known to sports science, and tried to work out, okay, what's the metabolic cost of running? How can we convert the data we get from this power meter to the metabolic cost of running? So it gives us kind of a measure of how hard we're working. So it's just one number. It's just like pace, except it's adjusted for running up hills. Because you know what it's like. You're running along at what you think might be 7 out of 10 effort. Then you start running uphill at 7 out of 10 effort, and of course your heart rate changes and your perceived exertion changes, but your power doesn't, because you're working at the same effort. So that's the basic behind it. I mean, it gets a little bit more complicated, but for most users, that's it in a nutshell. It gives you a measure of intensity. So, for example, an easy run might be 180 watts. A fast finish long run might be 200 watts. Tempo session might be 250 watts. Threshold might be 270 watts. And 1 mile reps might be 300 watts. So it gives you kind of a rough idea about how it might work.
Yeah, that's really interesting. So, and so how do you determine what, those levels that you just mentioned? Is it experience that you were able to plot those numbers out? How do you determine what level you should be aiming at?
So there's a number of different ways. Heart rate, I keep mentioning heart rate because most people can understand heart rate. So if I reference in terms of that, it'd be easy to understand. So heart rate, people either use one of two ways usually. They usually use 180 or 220 minus your age, which is completely wrong, and it shouldn't be used at all because it's wrong for 50% of the population. Your fitness isn't related to your age, so you shouldn't use that. But if you use heart rate and based on a threshold test, and the typical threshold test is a 30-minute run as fast as you can, and your average heart rate for the last 20 minutes of that run is your threshold, and that becomes the basis of your training prescriptions. So in heart rate, you might say, threshold is 100% of threshold. Your long, easy runners might be 75%. Marathon might be 90%. 1 mile reps might be 105% of threshold heart rate. So with power, a similar thing. You can do power tests. You can do it the same way. Typically, they prescribe a 10-minute all-out run followed by a 3-minute all-out run with a gap between. But now the latest software that I know Stride use, they have a more sophisticated system where it works it out for you. So you just run, and it detects that information for you. And the more runs you do, the more accurate that test is. So then you have a measure of what your threshold pace is, and you work your zones out accordingly. So easy runs might be 75 to 85%, thresholds, 95 to 100%, tempos, 85 to 95, etc.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And obviously you're an advocate of this. So is your experience been that it's an accurate way of to set your training?
Yeah, look, accuracy is something that some of the more skeptical coaches around the place kind of say we shouldn't use power monitors, or they're not quite there yet. But I think you're kind of throwing out the baby with the bathwater there. I think in any system, there's inaccuracies. So heart rate, there's inaccuracies, but plenty of coaches use heart rate. Pace, there's inaccuracies. GPS is not infallible. I mean, how many people do a marathon and go, I was on track for sub 3.5, but the course is long. So I know the course wasn't long, your GPS wasn't right.
Yeah.
GPS is infallible as well. So any system has inaccuracies. It's a case of understanding those inaccuracies and making sure you allow for them. So with power meters, the inaccuracies are on technical trail. Like if you're on technical trail, I'm not one to say that it's accurate. But on technical trail, your biggest limitation is not effort. It's how skilled you are running up or down technical trail. Like if you're looking at your watch wondering how fast or how hard your heart's beating or what your power level is down a technical trail, you're not going fast enough. So technical stuff's more about skill. On super steep climbs, like, I've done climbs in races of 50, 60, 70%, and the algorithm they use just falls apart above about 30%. So it has its limitations, but when you look at a race like UTMB, most of the climbs are in the 10 to 20% range, where the accuracy is very, very good. And more important than accuracy is reliability. Like, if it's not accurate compared to, say, a sophisticated treadmill test hooked up to an oxygen mask, blah, 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 doesn't really matter as long as day in, day out, week in, week out, the numbers you're getting are reproducible. So you can accurately measure your effort. And that's where heart rate falls down, because it's not. Because if you do a hard session on fresh legs, your heart rate might be 5 or 10 beats higher than if you did it on tired legs. If you did a session after 3 hours sleep compared to fully rested, it's going to be different. Whereas power just tells you what you ran. It doesn't judge anything. It's just telling you what you ran. So yes, there are some inaccuracies. If it's super muddy, if it's snowy, if it's really sandy, all those terrain surface will change the numbers, but they form a very small part of most races. So if you're the type of person that requires 100% accuracy consistent, well, forget power, forget heart rate, forget pace, because there isn't anything that gives you that on the trail. It's trail running. It's not like that. But if you want something that's very accurate for most trails and most hills, then yeah, power meters can certainly give you that. I mean, little things like, as a coach, a client will say to me, how did my hill session look? Now, if I'm looking at a client without power, maybe they have heart rate, but then it's hard to compare a heart rate reading in the middle of summer compared to the middle of winter, so I can't really see the progress. If it's speed, I can compare the individual reps that are up and down the same hill. I can say, yeah, you were 10 minutes per mile for the first two, and you were 10:10 for the last three, so you slowed down a little bit. But as soon as they go to another hill, it's changed. I can't compare last week's session on one hill to this week's session on a different hill. Whereas power, I can say, yep, you did 290 watts for all 5 reps this week. Last week you were 285 and you dropped down to 270. Much better this week. So it gives you much more objective feedback on how your training is going. As a coach, I really like it because it gives me so much more information that I can give that back to the athlete and say, yeah, you slowed down a bit in the last 2 reps. That's because your stride length decreased slightly, and your cadence dropped a little bit as well. So it gives you so much more information to really plan your training out a bit more.
Yeah. And how can they be used in a race? How do you advise your clients to use them during a race?
So in a race, first thing to work out is you target power levels. So there's various formulas you can use based on time, really. You work out, once you know your critical power, which is like your threshold power, and you have a rough estimate of how long the race will take you, it's relatively easy to input those figures into a formula and go, right, my race target is 180 watts. It gets a little bit more complicated in that in any ultra, we all slow down. I've seen studies on world record 100-kilometre road races, and even the guys running sub 6:30 for 100K, they slow down by about 5 to 8% towards the end of the race. So we all slow down. There's no such thing as a next split ultra. So there's no such thing as keeping your power level the same for the whole race. But the idea is, if you've got a number to start with and you can stick to that number for the first 4 to 6 hours, usually the rest will take care of itself. Because what it means is you pace the 4 to 6 hours really well relative to your fitness. And from then on, it's just trying to do the best you can. So if you use power for nothing other than the first kind of 4 to 6 hours of a race, it's done its job. Because the biggest mistake people make in races is going out too hard. And if you avoid that, you avoid cramping, you avoid massive DOMs in your legs later on, you potentially avoid stomach problems, you avoid kind of bonks in your energy levels because you're not pushing through too many calories. It just means your race experience is so much more predictable in terms of highs and lows, in terms of nutrition, in terms of cramping. You can kind of wipe them off the slate and just enjoy your run. And like when I did UTMB, not that I used a power meter, but as an example of a well-paced race, when I passed 700 people in the last 70K, and the feeling you get passing that many people towards the end of a race, it just fires you up more and more and more. So getting that pacing right early on just means your race experience is so much more enjoyable compared to the typical went out too fast, suffered like a pig in the last 30K, never doing ultras again. Oh, hang on, there's a race, I'll sign up for the next one,
Yeah, quite. Yeah, that's really interesting. Thank you. So you've mentioned a little bit, how you sort of analyze your clients' training and that sort of thing. Just talk us through the process that you would take, for example, after a race to analyze, your client's performance.
Well, that's the other good thing about power is if you haven't got power, then all you're really looking for is maybe you can kind of have a look at the pace of the first half versus the second half. If the terrain's fairly similar, the terrain's different, you can't even do that. You can look at, say, your results compared to others. So if I see a client who was, say, 300th at the 30-kilometre mark, but they were 500th at the 80-kilometre mark, I know they probably haven't paced it very well. But you really can't do much more. With power, what we can do, we can look at average power throughout the race and go, okay, your average power in the first quarter was 200. Your average power in the last quarter was 185. Fantastic. You paced it really well. Or, no, actually, you dropped 20% power from the start to the finish, so you went out too hard. We can also then look at power uphill versus power downhill and see how did your power uphill change throughout the race, how did your power downhill change throughout the race, and see where any strengths or weaknesses might lie. We might see that downhill they were 150 at the start, but by the end they were 100, whereas flat they only dropped off 10 or 20 watts. So we know that running on the flat was quite good, but their downhill power they really struggled with. So we need to do more work on the downhills. We might see, their hiking power dropped off. So we need to do some more hiking training. So we can really get a really good idea about where their strengths and weaknesses are throughout the race, and that can really help tailor training post-race to working on those strengths and weaknesses.
Yeah, that's great. Okay, do you have any advice for someone who might be looking for a coach, particularly an ultra running coach, for the first time?
Yeah, look, there's so many of us around there. I think you've got to find someone who gels with you. Typically for me, if someone approaches me, we'll send a few emails back and forth. I get a feel for what they're training for, what kind of help they need, what they expect of a coach. I'll tell them about what I expect of them. We all charge different amounts. We all have different levels of service. If you're looking for a personalised program, ask the questions. Are the programs tailored towards me, or are they a bit more general? Can I ask you questions during the week? If you give me a speed session on Tuesday and Tuesday morning my kid gets sick, can I call you and move the session to another day? Or is it kind of limited access and I have to do it myself? How often can we chat? What's your specialities? Like, what do you really work with? Because some coaches will say they work from park runners to 100-mile races. And I think if you're really serious, you want to be working with somebody who specializes in what you do. So if someone says to me, I want to work on my half marathon road times, I say, look, I'm not the coach to do that. I can probably train you, but I'm sure there are better coaches out there who do nothing but 10K and half marathon training plans. You said to me, I do hilly 100K to 100-mile races. So, yep, that's my cup of tea. I can help you out with that. Because the thing with that is the more time you spend coaching that kind of client, the better you get at it. It's like, if you've got a sore knee, do you see a general practitioner doctor or do you see a knee specialist? Obviously, you're going to get better results seeing a knee specialist. So try and find somebody who's coached people to do whatever you want to do. So if you're a back-of-the-pack runner, don't get a coach who only coaches elites, because they may not have much experience in coaching somebody who barely makes the cutoffs. So just ask a lot of questions, find out what their experience is, what kind of people they coach, so you really get a sense of what you're signing up for. Yeah.
And I guess, like you say, there's got to be a bit of sort of chemistry. You've got, it's a relationship like anything else, isn't it?
Yeah. Yep, definitely.
Okay, that's great. Thank you. Okay, we're nearly at the end now. Last couple of questions. First of all, what, in your opinion, are 3 characteristics which are useful to be successful in ultra running?
I think the first one is patience. I think too many of us want, says me, who's my first ultra was 95 miles, but we'll just ignore that, okay? I see too often people want to get results straight away. They want, I've got 3 months till my next 100K. Do you think I can run a PB? And I think too many of us aren't in it for the long game. I think the long game is where the real results happen. I mean, to give an example, if you're running, say, 30 miles a week, and you've heard that running 60 miles a week is better for ultra runners. If I said to you, okay, that's going to take 2 years, you go, really? Can I do it in like 3 months? No, but if I said to you, look, let's add 1 mile per week every second week onto your total weekly plan. 1 mile per week every second week, that's nothing. But in a year, that's 26 miles. And in 2 years, that's 52 miles added on to your already 30 miles. Now you're doing 80 miles a week. Now, whether you want to or have the time is not the point I'm trying to make. It's the case of if you're patient and in it for the long game, your body can adapt to pretty much anything. Like I hear all the time, oh, my body can't handle 100 Ks a week. Well, how long did you take to get from where you are to 100 Ks a week? Oh, I gave it plenty of time. I gave it 3 months. Like, no, that's not plenty of time for your body to adjust. And having said that, there's always stories of people who adapted really quickly. But you've got to realize that you are you, and you adapt as quickly as you adapt. So understanding that and being patient is really key, because the enjoyment of the sport and the results of the sport come from those people who can be patient and put in training week after week after week. So the next thing is consistency, and that comes with patience. If you can be consistent with your training week after week after week, then the results will come. And consistency really comes down to enjoying the sport. Like, it's pretty hard to be consistent doing something over and over again unless you're enjoying your training. So to be consistent, you've got to know your why. You've got to know why you're doing the sport. And one thing I see with a lot of runners is they fall into the trap of entering the same races year in, year out, because they're local, everyone does it, whether it's UTA in Australia, or it's Hong Kong 100 in Hong Kong, or it's Lakeland 100 in the UK, or but they never really think about why they're doing it. You know, the first time it's a thrill, second time they want to beat the time. After a while, they think, why am I doing this anymore? Like, yeah, ask yourself those questions. Like, do you really want to do that race over and over again, or other races that you're really keen? Because unless you have that kind of passion and excitement for the sport, you're going to start losing your mojo, start losing your consistency, you start getting injured, and it's just a downhill spiral from there. So love what you do, and make sure you keep that love by tapping in with, you know, why you're doing the sport.
Yeah, that's really good advice. And like you say, it's I think sometimes it's an element of, you know, we do what's known, don't we? Once you've done a race a couple of times, it's kind of, you've got it on the calendar, and, you know, and then you suddenly think to yourself, actually, there's all these other races. Why do I keep, you know, for me, I
think we fall in the category of two categories. We're either scared of making the step into the unknown, so we're scared of going from 100 mile or 100K distance up or down. And a lot of people think that once they've done 100-mile races, that, you know, that's it. Doing any less is like to cop out. But, you know, racing 50K is hard on a mountain course is hard, and it's a challenge. It's a new challenge for a lot of people because they're not used to pushing that hard. So going down in distance can be just as exciting as going up to 200 miles or, you know, a last one standing, big backyard type race. So kind of really think about why you're doing it. And sometimes you've got to get back outside that comfort zone to find that kind of excitement again, that kind of like half excitement and half kind of like, oh, that's a bit scary. That's when you really kind of love it, I reckon. That's where you need to spend more time in that kind of zone.
Yeah. Okay, if there's anybody watching who has never run an ultra marathon and is just thinking about perhaps starting, what would be a piece of advice you'd give them?
First of all, don't be off-put by the crazy stories you hear about training and 200-mile races and hallucinations and sleep running and, you know, all that stuff that the more experienced ultra runners like thrive on. Don't be off-put by that. There are plenty of races you can start and finish in a day that don't involve any of that. Second thing is, don't equate ultra running with marathons. Like, you know, a lot of people think, oh, marathon was so hard, like ultra running seems to be even harder. Like, for most people, a 50K to a 50-mile ultra is easier than a road marathon. You know, the intensity is down. It's more about just kind of like putting one foot in front of the other. Whereas for a marathon, even if you're like a 4.5 hour marathon runner, you're still working really hard to your ability. You're still, you know, smashing yourself. And you know, the day after the marathon, you can barely walk, and you're, you know, it's hard work. Whereas 50K, 60K, 80K ultras, not saying they can't be just as hard, but for a lot of people, it's just about getting out in the trails, finishing a distance that seems longer than what's possible, and having fun and enjoying yourself. The second thing is, training doesn't have to be arduous. Like, you can finish an ultra on, you know, 30 to 50 miles a week. I've got people that are competitive in 100K, 100-mile races doing 70 to 80K a week training, which is not really that much. And I'm saying podium runners, you know. I've got people finishing races 100K distance doing, you know, 30, 40 miles. You don't have to log 15 hours a week of training. If you've only got 3 hours during the week and 3 hours on the weekend, you can do ultras. Like, there's no question about that at all. So don't be afraid to kind of like take that step into the unknown, because it's not as scary as what most people think it is. Of course, if you want to be scared, there's plenty of scary races out there that you can really dive headfirst into, but you don't have to. You don't have to.
It's quite interesting talking to quite a few people who have said the people that have made the jump from road marathons particularly have said it's interesting that the focus kind of goes from after race day, oh, so what time did you do it in, to how far was it when it's an ultra, and they know, they perceive that mind shift themselves, but in their training and in everything, because they've stopped chasing that, like you say, whether it be a 3-hour marathon or whatever, and a completely different mindset going into it.
It is. It's interesting talking to runners post-race. Like if you talk to a marathon runner post-race, the first questions they get asked, what time did you do? If you stand around at the end of the London Marathon and chat to people, it's what time did you do? If you stand around at the end of an ultra, very few people will say what time. The first question they'll ask, how did you go? Did you enjoy it? How was it? It's not about time. It's about finishing according to your expectations and goals, not about how, what the time was. And it's a real shift. Some road runners really struggle with that. I've coached a few that, trying to teach them to let go of that kind of time focused mentality and focus more on experience. That's not to say you can't push hard, of course, not to say you can't push yourself to the limit, but even those athletes that do that, the course dictates that. Like if the course is super muddy, you're going to be slower, potentially hours slower. So you've got to switch that mindset onto, the race itself and not the time, the experience you have during the race, not the finishing time.
It's not like comparing your time at the London Marathon to what you did in Berlin, where it's going to be
no, I can't do that at all.
Okay, and what about anybody who's watching who is already an established ultrarunner, already sort of started their ultrarunning journey, but they're keen to improve, to take it to the next level? What would be a piece of advice you'd offer them?
So I think the biggest mistakes I see people like that make is, first of all, most people run their easy runs too fast and their long runs too fast and don't push hard enough on their speed and hill sessions. So the first thing I'd say is slow all your runs down, except for the harder runs. You've got 3-minute marathon runners, like your sub 205 marathon runners who run their slow runs at slower than 4-minute K pace. So over a minute per K slower than their race pace for a marathon. But you've got like 4-hour marathon runners doing their long runs at only 30 seconds per K slower than their marathon pace. It's like, it's just, and if you're trying to build up your mileage and if you're trying to do hard sessions, you're going to come a croppers because you just can't sustain that kind of intensity all the time. So slow your long runs down, slow your easy runs down, and then you can start pushing harder on your speed sessions and your hill sessions, stuff like that. I think that's the biggest thing most people do wrong, that if they change that one thing, they'd find they'd get injured less, they get more out of their speed and tempo sessions and hill sessions, and they'd be able to increase their volume more as well and therefore get better results. So that's probably my number one piece of advice by a long way.
Yeah, good advice. And like you say, it's something that a lot of people, because I know myself, it's and I think that maybe there's an element of I need to do 15 miles today, let's just get it done. It's consciously having to tell yourself slow down.
That's a switch from a road runner. Now a road runner will typically base their training on distance, go out and do a 10-mile run or a 15-mile run, whereas I can't speak for all coaches, but I know a lot of the ultra coaches I know, we talk about time, go out for a 1-hour run or a 3-hour run or a 2-hour run. So straight away, by doing it on time, it's not then focused on speed. Because if you're slow, you just cover less distance. That's fine. You're still out there for an hour. Like you're just running 6 miles instead of 7 miles or whatever the case may be. So when you make that switch to time rather than distance, it helps to let go of that. And therefore you slow down and not worry too much. So I think it's another important thing to base on time, not distance.
Yeah, it's a good tip for your easy runs, just an hour easy or whatever.
Yeah, absolutely.
Oh, well, that's. I think that just about brings us to the end. So thank you so much for joining us today, Andy. It was really interesting to talk to you.
Pleasure.
We'll put the links underneath so everyone can come and can follow you and check you out. And thank you everyone else for watching. And thanks again, Andy.